lead us in the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
See, this is truly a team.
Yeah.
If one strays just a little bit, the others pull him right back in.
There you go.
All right. All right, may I have a motion and a second that the agenda of February 25th, 2020 be approved as submitted?
Second.
Any questions or comments? All those in favor? None opposed, thank you. May I have a motion and a second that the Board of Education approve the consent agenda as written on the agenda?
So moved.
Any questions or comments? All those in favor? None opposed, thank you. Treasurer's report. May I have a motion and a second to approve the motion, or to approve the treasurer's report, including the cash report, general fund cash report, the general fund revenue status report, general fund budget status report, school lunch fund cash report, and school lunch fund revenue and expense budget report for the month ending December 31st, 2019.
Second.
All, questions, comments? All those in favor? None opposed, thank you. All right, no special reports tonight and no visitors tonight. Okay, so now Levy is not here. If she shows up, then will we come back to this?
We can do that, I think.
Okay, that would be great. All right. Superintendent's reports.
All right. So I do have, for this meeting, I do have some student and staff honors. I also want to talk with the board has the school calendar, but want to talk a little bit about the school calendar, which will be voted on later in this meeting. Then I'll turn it over to Dr. Sansucci as part of our budget process for 2020-2021. It's the Program 2 budget review, and then also an update on the tax cap report. Really cool news. The Penfield Central School District has been awarded a $10,000 community fund grant by Bosch Corporation. Director of STEAM, Nicole Whitehead, applied for the grant, and it will be used to support the elementary science programs. Very exciting.
Yeah.
Jump Rope for Hearts. Scribner Community raised $15,324 for the American Heart Association during its recent Jump Rope for Heart fundraiser. Many of our elementary schools do Jump Rope for Heart. Scribner hasn't. They brought it back. They did in the past. They brought it back in a pretty significant amount of money they raised through that event. We had Go Red campaigns across the district. Our Penfield schools and district office participate in the annual Go Red for Women campaign. And Harris Hill raised $216. Cobbles raised $125 for the American Heart Association.
Very nice.
I'm not going to go through this list of names, but they are all in the agenda if you're interested. And just really, it's kudos again and congratulations to all of our Penfield students who've been selected to participate in the all-county music festivals in March. And so we have students from the high school, Bay Trail, and the elementary. And just amazing students, amazing musical talent. And we wish them luck as they go off to all-county music festivals. This week that we're in right now is National Public Schools Week, and Penfield, like many districts around our county, state, and country, are celebrating National Public Schools Week. The district kicked off its celebration at the annual robotics rally hosted by PHS Team 1511, Rolling Thunder. We had board members there, Catherine and Mark and Calvin, and Lisa Chidsey, Lisa Benatti-Chidsey, I apologize, were there, as well as our town supervisor, Assemblyman Mark Johns, and some town board members. Linda Cole was there, and were able to join us for this exciting event. And just some pictures, and please take a look at social media Nancy put out, both on Facebook and Twitter. Lots of great photos. I will just say that the team loves having people from the district there, especially the board members, because I know that the robotics team appreciates everything that the school board does to make sure the robotics team is able to move forward in terms of paying stipends for the coaches and allowing our space to be used and allowing chaperones, transportation, all those things that the board puts forth to make sure that robotics is successful. Now I'm on to the school calendar, and so this is a way that we show the school calendar. We will, if approved, put online in our typical format that looks more like a calendar, but so you can actually see it. This is key dates, and so really what people want to hear, when I say people, community members, especially parents and staff and students, and just so the board's aware in the community, is that the calendar for the school year is a local decision. There is a calendar committee that's made up of BOCES 1 and BOCES 2 representatives, as well as representatives from the Diocese of Rochester, private schools, PTA, union representation, and I happen to be on that committee this year. A lot of things come into play, including when our two county areas around us, so Wayne and Ontario, we also take a look at when their breaks are. We try to align because we know we have families, staff members that may live in one county but send their kids to work in one county and live in another. And so our calendar does look a little different than that calendar. For the county-wide agreed-upon calendar. Everything's the same except for the start of the school year, and that is that we are starting our staff and our students before Labor Day. And that is because Labor Day is late this year. Labor Day falls on September 7th, and so you can see from the calendar, the first day for teachers would be August 31st and the 1st. So typically over the last few years, we've actually had teachers back for 3 full days before students come. Because of how this calendar falls, we'll have teachers back for 2 days, and then students will start Wednesday, September 2nd, and be in school September 2nd and September 3rd, but then we'll have a 4-day Labor Day weekend, so no school for staff or students on Friday, the 4th through Labor Day. And then when we come back after Labor Day, we're back in session. This allows us to do some interesting things. This calendar, if you take a look at when our December break is, December break for Penfield with this calendar falls on December 23rd. So the rest of the county that's starting after Labor Day, their first day of break in December is the 24th. So because we're starting basically 2 days before Labor Day, we have 2 days that we can put back into our calendar. And so this allows us to have the 23rd off, where many other schools will be in session the 23rd. The other area that we're taking that additional day, because we're starting before Labor Day, is Memorial Day recess. The last 2 years, because how the calendar fell, many districts around us had a 4-day Memorial Day weekend. We will still have that, while most of the districts around us will not. That is the day that if we have the torrential snowstorms that could happen in Rochester and we have to take a day back to make our requirement by the state, it would be the Friday before Memorial Day. And that will be noted on the calendar. A lot of these things can't change, like the last day for teachers, the graduation, our testing days, our Regents days, and the April break and the February break are the same for Ontario County, Wayne, and all of Monroe County schools. And that is the end of my update, unless there's questions on any of that, but especially the calendar.
Board members? Lisa?
I just thought of this.
Sure.
Just curious, because we've done this before, I think, many years ago.
Yep.
We're not the only ones starting before Labor Day, right?
We're not the only ones. I can speak to now districts that have approved their
Right.
calendars through their boards.
Talking about
Is
them.
Pittsford Central Schools is starting before Labor Day. Your calendar decisions a lot of times have to do with your collective bargaining unit, especially teachers. So there are some districts that in their contract it says they can't start before Labor Day. And then it would become a negotiation piece to try to start before. So some districts can't because of the collective bargaining agreement. Ours is that it has to be mutually agreed upon. This is run through the president of PEA and through his team, and they're supportive of this on a whole. Starting before Labor Day allows, again, those 2 other days to get built into the calendar.
Thank you.
No problem.
I have a question.
Calvin?
So we're going to start, we're going to go to school for 2 days and then we're going to come off for Labor Day.
Yes, and it'll be a 4-day Labor Day weekend. So it'll be Friday and then the federal holiday of Labor Day that Monday.
Okay.
Okay,
All right.
thank you.
You're welcome. I'll turn it over to Dr. Sansucci for the instructional budget for 2020-2021. Gotta get used to that.
Thought for a second I didn't have it right, but yes. So, and I'll begin as I always do. So, tonight per our schedule is the second instructional presentation. So this is general classroom instruction as well as sports, but primarily this is the general education portion of the budget. So we always begin each of these presentations, and really I think there's not a board meeting that goes by that we don't reference in some way the district's goals. Those of academic achievement and excellence, partnerships, and fiscal responsibility. And I think I always say that while the budget certainly is always about fiscal responsibility, and we talk a lot about that as we move through, it supports academic achievement and excellence. And tonight's presentation really is about that. We've moved through the calendar fairly quickly. We started in October when we established the calendar that we're on. We've heard audit reports. We did some preliminary work. The board established goals and developed assumptions and guidelines based on those goals and assumptions under which we've been operating as we built this budget. We had an early tax cap update, and tonight we have more information than we did in December. So later in your agenda, you'll be finalizing that tax cap. So we need to talk a little bit about what's changed and what the components of that are. We've looked at the administrative and the special area instructional areas of the budget, talked about capital, and now we're into the single largest portion of the budget, that of the instructional program. This is about 30%, fully a third of our budget, and as you'll see as we move through, composed mostly of staff, but it contains classroom instruction for K-12, programs for occupational education, libraries, computers, clubs, and sports. Overall, it's flat, essentially. It's down by 0.3%. So on a $30 million, that's $87,000 decrease. So down very slightly, essentially the same from year to year. And in part, that change is driven by retirements that we had last year. We had, as you recall, a retirement incentive that generated a number of retirements. We're seeing the benefit of that in this budget. And there's also some staffing changes. Not staffing reductions, because these are folks, for the most part, who are already gone, and we're not proposing to refill the position. So we're not cutting people, but we are electing to not refill some positions. It includes 4 sections of kindergarten per building. So right now, one of our buildings for the last several years, Harris Hill, has had 3 sections of incoming kindergartners. We've always made the, I think our position's always been that we're going to budget for 4 and then evaluate it as it goes along. I think that makes particular sense this year because based on our projections, as you'll recall, I'm really anticipating, and we'll see how it turns out. We'll monitor this as we move not just through the budget process, but it gets monitored into July and August. I really think we're looking at 4 sections for this year at Harris Hill. We'll see. Also in the possibility is Indian Landing's numbers might suggest a 5th section of kindergarten. So 4 sections of kindergarten we'll see how that works out. If it all came to pass, the budget also includes 3 unallocated positions. Those are positions that we budget, but that we don't necessarily have a specific idea of how they're going to get used. So we don't use them unless we need them, but that kindergarten discussion is a perfect example. If we needed that 5th section, if Harris Hill needs 4, we need that additional staff member, it would come out of unallocated. It also covers changes in high school schedule, unanticipated needs, special education coverage. It gets chopped up a lot as we move throughout the course of the year, and it provides that flexibility that we need to be able to operate a system as large as this one. It includes reductions of 2 FTE non-instructional staff members. One of those is the reduction at one of the elementary schools of a building level teaching assistant. Whoops, sorry, I don't know how I did that. Talking with my hands. Building level teaching assistant that was vacated at the end of last year and not replaced. And also 1 FTE of hall monitor at the high school, again, that's been vacated, the duties reassigned and not replaced. You'll recall the conversation around a librarian. That position was reduced subsequent to last year's retirements, and a position shared between the high school and Bay Trail. Because of student needs and also because of numbers, the budget does include an additional assistant basketball coach and a Nordic ski coach. Again, that's just based on the those are assistant coaching positions, really supervisory and assisting positions, just based on the number of students that are enrolled in those programs. So I talked about the various components of that budget. This is what it looks like when you split it up by functional area. So that $30.4 million, you can see just north of 25 million of it is in regular instruction. Much smaller, well, it takes some time to talk about in terms of the dollars in this budget, much smaller amounts for occupational education, libraries, computers, clubs, and athletics. And also, I know you won't be surprised when I tell you that if we split it up differently and look at it by object area, by the area of expense, it's salaries. The vast majority of this budget, of that 30.4 million, 25 million of it is in salaries for certified or instructional positions. Non-certified clerical support and so forth is an important component, but it's much smaller. And you can see there are actually bars for travel and conference and software in summer. It's just that in comparison to salary, that's not what this budget is about. I want to spend a little bit of time. That $25 million, I think, for instructional certified salaries can be usefully broken down. So if we dive a little deeper into that, what are we spending it on, just the $25 million? Again, we're back to sort of the same picture where general education forms the majority of salaries. That $25 million in salaries, the majority again going to general education. Though the other areas that we mentioned, not surprisingly, not as much. And by area, so again, that same, now the splitting up the 22 million, we just keep moving down the components. So now $22 million of general instruction salaries. What does that represent? Elementary, all 4 elementary schools, obviously the largest, some district-wide salaries, middle school and high school. And finally, then that same $22 million broken down by functional area. So here you can see that district-wide and unassigned is really substitute costs, as well as the unallocated costs. In-service, tuition and stipends. Really the largest components are K-6 classroom salaries. And then once you're out of the elementary school, once you're out of K-6, the core areas, so English, math, science, and social studies, And then you can see the other various components. So reading, foreign language, enrichment, music, and PE probably in second and third place. Changes from year to year are really driven by changes in staffing. As I mentioned, we had a number of retirements. Other than that, we're budgeting for contractual increases in those codes. That's the instructional program in a nutshell. And as you can see, it's virtually identical, within 0.3% of the previous year. We've had increases in the other budgets. We've talked about what's going on in the buildings and grounds budget. We're at the point now where we're coming close to the end. At the next budget, we'll look at the BOCES programs, and then after that, we'll get our first look at a total budget when we look at the benefit areas that support all of the salaries in this budget, so including health, Social Security, retirement, and some other benefits. That'll bring us to a total budget, and we'll be able to begin to have conversations about tax rate, revenue picture, and so forth. Next steps really as we move through are we are in the throes right now of BOCES budget. That's as you know from previous years, we do a lot through BOCES, and we're still in the process of finalizing that budget, so that needs to continue. We'll also continue enrollment conversations, program and staffing reviews. So right now, we are in the process of, still in the process, I should say, of having conversations with buildings about staffing for next year, about plans, about potential changes. And while we don't expect anything dramatic to come out of those conversations, there's always the possibility for change. And I will always bring those to you as we wrap the budget up in those final couple of meetings. We're also gathering assessment data right now to be able to project a tax rate. So we're coming down to the end. I understand that Penfield they've been flirting with this idea of reassessment. They are due for it. They've scheduled it. They've talked about it. They've pulled back from it. I understand that they will not be reassessing for this upcoming year. So we'll be dealing again with that dynamic of a decreasing equalization rate in the town of Penfield. So that will provide a little bit of complexity. Oops. Oh, I'm pushing the wrong, there we go. This is the remaining schedule. So you'll see that at the March 10th meeting, we'll talk about BOCES, a complete proposed budget. At the second meeting, the deadline for petitions for board candidates and for any relevant budget petitions is April 20th, so that we can approve and adopt a final budget at that April 21st meeting. That moves us into the final two components of this budget. May 5th is the budget hearing. May 19th is the budget vote and election. I do want to go back to the calendar for just a second. One of the things that we had intended or potentially scheduled to talk about at this meeting was any necessary State Environmental Quality Review Act resolutions. This would be the meeting where we'd be considering those if we had a capital project built into this year's budget. As you know, very often with our budget, we'll offer a smallish capital project. This in our schedule, when we designed our calendar, we'd anticipated that possibility. This would be the meeting when we would be doing that. We're not, but what it does give me the opportunity, because as you know, we've got a lot going on in the world of capital. So I did just want to pause for a second and talk about that. So we began work on the elementary additions project over the February break with some tree removal at Cobbles. They've also begun to put up fencing and establish their staging areas. So we're underway. We've begun to roll into that project, and that'll heat up. They've already been doing B shift work in the elementary schools, after school. So it'll begin to ramp up quickly as we get closer and closer to the summer. But also in our planning is, as the board knows, we've had some conversations as we've had many conversations and gotten as far along as scheduling a vote on a proposed land purchase and construction project associated with renovations or replacement of our transportation facility. At previous meetings, we've talked about that, and I've said we're still in that. We still have that need. That need hasn't gone away, even though we had to separate the elementary additions project and move forward with it because of the press of student needs. That other part of our plan hasn't gone away. We're continuing that. We are in negotiations right now. I think final negotiations with for the potential purchase of a piece of property. That's not final yet, but I hope to be able to bring the board information about that as for their discussion and approval, and then subsequent voter approval and development of a capital project in the future. Not this year, but next, for a vote next year. And I hope to bring that information and begin that process in the next couple of board meetings. So we're close, but we are not there yet. Let's see, so with that, the last two, let me just finish by saying the last two important meetings of our budget. The most important one, of course, on May 19th at the high school in the gym, the budget vote and election from 6 to 9. The last formal presentation of the budget will be on May 5th. That's the budget hearing. So that's it for, I have some further information on tax cap, a brief tax cap update, but I wanted to pause here to see if there are any questions.
Board members? Mark?
You mentioned that the Penfield's not planning on doing an assessment. Have you gotten information about what the correction factor is?
I don't, the equalization rate, I
Yes.
don't know. You'll recall it dropped pretty dramatically last year. I only have anecdotal information. So I had a conversation with Ann Buck. She does not know either, but she believes just from watching sales and where we're at that it won't drop as much as it did last year, that it will go down a couple of percentages.
Okay.
You know, that's far from being solid information, but that's the best information that I have at this point.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Lisa?
We discussed a little bit last year about the shift in the library that was brought up in this budget. I wondered if you could speak a little bit to that. I know we had some parent concerns.
Yep.
Thank you.
This budget, as Mark mentioned, has a reduction of a 1.0 library, but actually that change was made to start this school year. So that reduction's already been in place for since September. So we used to have two, just as a reminder, we used to have 2 full-time librarians at the high school and 2 at Bay Trail, which we were one of 2 districts that had that in Monroe County, all of Monroe County, and the other districts in the same spot as we are, as when there's a retirement, they're making a reduction. So far from September, we have 1 full-time at the high school, 1 full-time at Bay Trail, and then another full-time that's split, 0.6 at the high school and 0.4 at Bay Trail. And in speaking with building principals and walking through the buildings and being in the libraries, I'm very confident there has not been an impact to student instruction or support. I have not heard from any parent groups or concerns about that shift. It's really just something that we have the 3 librarians we have are incredible and doing great work and supporting our students through the library curriculum and obviously the both print and databases that we use, a lot of databases for online research. So far so good. We're going to monitor as we go through, but it's not one that I'll be recommending to go back to 2 full-time. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay.
All right, with that, I'd just like to spend a few minutes talking about the tax cap. I know everyone is looking forward to that. So this is in, this portion of this is in nature of review. So I just want to remind everyone where we ended up in terms of the components of our cap. So in terms of the tax-based growth factor, just the way it shook out this year, we are slightly above average for the county in terms of and again, this is the growth in the community of bricks and mortar new construction. So not reassessment, but actual new construction in the community. We're slightly above the average for the county. That's one, and that factor, which I'll get to in just a second, is one important component of the calculation, because the formula allows you essentially to increase the amount of taxes that you could collect to reflect that growth in the community, so that you have the capacity to take advantage of that growth. The other important parts of the calculation is the allowable levy growth factor. This is where the 2% tax cap comes from, or that language of the 2% cap. The levy can grow the lesser of 2% or the rate of inflation. So whichever of those two factors is less. And this year, we've been capped for the last 2 years at 2% because inflation was higher than that. For the 12 months trailing that we use to calculate the rate, it's now 1.89%. So that means that's the number that we will be using in our calculations. So that tax-based growth factor, 0.82%, so not quite 1% of real growth in the community in terms of assessed value, but close, has an impact, a positive impact on our tax cap, and 1.81% is the rate of inflation, so that's what we'll use. This is how that calculation works. So we begin with last year's levy, we increase it by the 0.82%, so the levy's allowed to go up by that amount of new construction. We add in base year payments in lieu of taxes to form a calculated base. That's then increased by the allowable levy growth factor, 1.8%, and you take out the upcoming year's pilots. Essentially what the formula is doing there is just neutralizing the benefit to the district of growths in pilot. Payment in lieu of tax projects now sort of come out of the calculation. So it's new construction in the community, but really what you get the benefit of is that 2% or 1.8% growth, because the new amount comes out. If you think about this conceptually here, our payments in lieu of tax collections are growing, so they reduce our tax cap by that same amount. So the idea is as your pilots grow, your levy shrinks so that you end up in the same spot, right? Go through that math. We had a little bit of carryover from last year, so we were under the cap by $33,000 last year. We end up all cooked in 2.66%. There are allowable exclusions in the formula, exclusions for years when there are significant increases in teacher or employee retirement system, or lawsuits that cause a claim, a dramatic claim against the district. We don't have any of those. The ERS and TRS rates for this year don't trigger the exclusion. So the tax levy limit, maximum allowable levy, don't have to be the same number, but they are. So we can offer to the public a budget that includes a levy increase of 2.66% without asking for a supermajority vote. So 50% plus one passes your budget as long as you stay under that levy limit. We still need to look at pilot agreements. I always like to confirm those one last time before we finalize this. You don't see it because it happens in the background, but there are exclusions happening in there for capital. You'll recall that we adopted a BOCES capital project this year. BOCES capital projects have never had anything to do with the tax cap until this year when they changed that, and we're still working our way through that guidance. I don't think it's going to impact us. What I think I understand is cooked in, but like, there's 27 emails a day on this as it goes back and forth and as we try and figure it out. So I'm reserving the right to change my mind about understanding it. So, but I think this is where we will end up. Oops, so that's that. That is tax
Okay, you're
cap
done.
update for now.
Okay, thank you. Board members, any questions or comments for Mark?
I had a question.
Yes, Calvin.
So are we looking at a 2.66% increase in the budget then?
Well, we haven't gotten there yet, so we still need to get a better sense of where we're at with regard to state aid and other revenues, and we haven't finalized the budget yet, but it's our intention to stay under that.
Okay, one more comment. I saw in the paper that we may not get our check from Albany this year for a rebate.
Yeah, that's,
Check.
that rebate, the tax rebate check, not STAR, STAR is a different piece, but you'll recall that they've had a number of different programs over the last few years. The legislature likes to be able to send people a check directly, and so that was that program, the most recent program for that expired. And so for it to continue would need to be included in this year's budget. I don't recall seeing it in the governor's budget, but I don't quote me on that because I'm not certain I keyed in on that. Whether or not it was in there or not, it would have to survive this sausage making process, and with a significant deficit, it's going to be hard for them to support. So I don't know how that's going to turn out.
Right.
It's I have gotten so far just one phone call, but I did have a resident call me to talk about it, so there's some interest and some concern. I think it's fair to say that the legislature would like it to continue, but you need money to make that work, and so that may be one of the things that falls by the wayside as they try and get to a budget that purportedly balances. So.
Any others? Okay, thanks, Mark.
That concludes superintendent reports.
Thank you, Dr. Putnam.
You're welcome.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, that's probably what it is. Thank you.
Okay, board members, we're on item 6. Technically, there's nothing for facilities tonight. Adoption of the tax levy limit. Chapter 97 of the laws of 2011, enacted by the state legislature and the governor, established a property tax cap on the amount that a school district's property tax levy can increase each year. This law requires that school districts submit to the state comptroller, the Commissioner of Education, and the Commissioner of Taxation and Finance any information necessary for calculating their tax levy limit for the coming school year no later than March 1st. The comptroller has developed a web tool that will allow districts to satisfy this reporting requirement via a single online submission. Based on the information and guidance available at this time, the 2020-21 levy limit for Penfield has been calculated as set forth below. Resolved that the Board of Education of the Penfield Central School District hereby approves the submission of the tax levy limit of $66,895,988 as calculated in accordance with the guidance set forth by the State Comptroller, the Commissioner of Education, and the Commissioner of Taxation and Finance. This tax levy limit represents an increase of 2.66%. And be it further resolved that the tax levy limit plus all exclusions as set forth in the law is hereby established at $66,895,988. This maximum levy increase after exclusions represents an allowable increase of 2.66%. And be it further resolved that the superintendent is authorized to submit any necessary revisions to the tax levy limit and/or the tax levy limit plus exclusions should new information become available. The amounts will be reported to the Board of Education. May I have a motion and a second?
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments? All those in favor? None opposed. Thank you. All right, textbook approval. May I have a motion and a second that the Board of Education approve the above recommended textbook as presented on February 4th, 2020?
So
All the
moved.
books are listed there on your agenda. Excuse me, Barbara.
You hesitated.
Is that a motion?
Yes,
All right.
sorry.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Oh, thanks, Emily.
Yes,
Any questions or comments? All those in favor? Any opposed? One opposed. Thank you. All right, school calendar. May I have a motion and a second that the board approve the 2020-2021 school calendar as presented?
So moved.
Any questions or comments? All those in favor? Any opposed? One opposed. Thank you. Nope. Pardon me? I can't hear you.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
I don't know,
Can I move on?
She's verifying who opposed,
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear
It
you.
was Calvin.
And so you, okay, very good.
just
Thank
for the
you.
minutes.
All right. Okay, President's remarks, MCSBA committee meetings, legislative. Mark, please.
Since our last board meeting, since there was a larger gap, we've had our legislative committee meeting and our legislative breakfast, I'm sorry. And the legislative committee meeting was essentially a preparation, final prep for the breakfast. The breakfast is something we do every year. It's a great opportunity for us to spend time with our representatives. We did something a little bit different this year where instead of the normal table and period of table discussion and then panel with questions and answers, we had essentially 2 cycles of table discussion. So we had a period of time with everyone sat at one table, or if people sat at a certain table, then they moved to another table. One thing, it helped us meet with more of our representatives instead of just one, and it really created more of the engagement that you really get at the table, which is more intimate. And then the panel was really just an opportunity for our representatives to talk about what's important to them. There was no Q&A, it was just
Right,
a nice
this is
panel.
more of a statement.
I thought it was a great change. I mean, the Q&A is nice, but it's not time efficient.
And it can get contentious, and so when you have this kind of format, it did flow more smoothly, and then we did have that opportunity when we were sitting with them to kind of hash some things out.
Absolutely. So I was I was supposed to be with Adam Bello, but he couldn't make it because, I can't remember her name, but she was getting sworn in as the county clerk.
Jamie Romeo.
Jamie was getting sworn as a county clerk that morning. Obviously, he stayed for that. He went to that. But his chief of staff, Jeff McCann, he was there, and so I was at his table. It was a great conversation. He clearly knows his stuff. I mean, he knows what's going on at a pretty detailed level. And when we talk about what Adam's approaches are and what they're trying to do, a lot of it seemed to align with ours, which is much more engagement between the county and the districts and other parts of the government. Because we don't really work with the county much at a legislative level. I mean, we do at a lot of other levels, but not at the legislative level because they're not making rules that affect us. It's the state and the federal government does. But there's still a lot of, we can work with a lot of our other districts and a lot of other parts of the government locally. So it's nice that they're working at trying to bring that engagement and increasing that. And one of the things they brought up specifically, which is kind of before my time, which is the Council of Governments. They want to reinstitute that, which had been in place and it dropped off some years ago, and I don't really remember how many years ago it went away. And that seems to be very favorable that they're going to do that. The second table I sat at was Mark Johns. Mark Johns has been, he's a regular, and we all know him, he knows us, and it was I want to say it was the kind of conversation we normally have. It was the normal topics. I think everyone focused more on Adam because that was really a new engagement, because actually the first time the county representative had come to our legislative breakfast.
Yeah, that's true.
So,
yeah.
And then Joe Morelli came as well, which was nice for him to come. I know he's got bigger things to deal with, but he still tries to make a point of coming down and spending time with us and working with and meeting with the districts here at the county.
Yes, he's very committed to our area. It was pretty amazing.
And to education. So yes, it was great. So as a whole, I think it was very successful, Part of this was a strategy of not going to Albany this year because of all the changes that are going on and people not running. This
Yeah.
was the place to really make those contacts. Again, those who I spoke to, but there's a lot of the people who showed up, opportunity for our colleagues to make contacts and talk to them in depth.
Yeah, and it was, if you recall, well, some of you, well, we were there, and I kept thinking, oh my God, we're gonna get this call that it's gonna get canceled, because that was right after the snow day, wasn't it? Or it was very bad weather, and then it was supposed to clear up later that day, but we didn't know how it was gonna go in the morning, but the representatives came, and I think 95 people in attendance, or something close to that number, so it was very well, everybody just plowed through and made it happen. Bless you. And, yeah, so that was a great recap, and, anything you wanted to add?
No, it was
Okay,
great.
no, I thought it was, yeah, very good.
All right, thank
Thanks,
you.
Mark. Okay, information exchange. Lisa?
So information exchange was a panel from West Arundecoit that they kind of talked a little bit about, well, mostly about literacy, but similar to kind of what Kristen did, sort of an overview of the new standards and some changes that they were making. They're also using the letters program that we're using, so that's really nice to see when they, bring in experts, and we're already kind of doing that stuff. But they had some really cool learning targets and about creating reader identity, I guess is what they called it. So did you get a copy of the slides?
I
or-
did.
Okay, good.
Yep.
Because I thought maybe we wanted to share them with Kristen, right? Is it Kristen?
Yeah,
Am I
Kristen
saying her name
Williamson.
right? Yeah. Because it was really sweet how they were talking about working with younger kids, and they had us each turn to each other and talk about how you identify yourself as a reader. And I was like, well, I never thought I was a strong reader. I went out to play, and how that carries kids through their education career. And I just thought it was kind of a sweet thing
Yeah.
that they talked about.
Yeah.
But interestingly enough, our next one, if anybody can make it, is supposed to be a pretty dynamic speaker, and I was trying to find her name and I can't, so I'll send it to you guys, because I think the packet came out about unconscious bias, which I think will be really cool. So, and they're expecting it might go longer than the hour as well. I
Is
think
it a
that's-
4 o'clock one, or?
No,
a-
it's
oh,
a
1
lunch
o'clock?
one,
It's
and
a
I want
lunch
to
one.
say it's the 11.
Yeah, this was a
It's next week,
reschedule
right?
from the first information exchange this year because of the weather and conflict. This is a reschedule because they had to get a filler for that first one. It was a dynamic presenter, Tom Putnam. So the first one was a reschedule. So she and I, Lisa, if we can find the name and share it out.
Yeah, I just
She is
got an email. I
really
can
well
send it,
respected, and
but
I think it'd be great.
When I saw that, I just thought that would be interesting and
Absolutely.
timely, and so,
Yeah.
and that's all I have.
All right, well, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, before we move on, while I have everyone's attention here, Sharon sent out a request for March PTA meetings, and so if you can get back to her on any availability you may have, that would be great. Okay, you're welcome. Okay, we have a Meet the Candidates Night. We're going to have one this year. So the event will be held on Monday, April 27th at 7 p.m. right here in the library.
I think, just as a reminder, we don't always have these. The board agreed that we would have them if there were more candidates than there are positions up.
Right.
And so officially, we don't have anybody because the packets are now open, but so the board's aware as I have meetings with a number of people who are interested in running for the board. So I think that all signs point to Meet the Candidates Night this year.
Okay, so it's scheduled,
Yep.
right? Okay. Okay.
And we can always cancel that
Abs-
if it
if
turns
it-
out
yep.
that some people decide not to run and
Absolutely.
Okay. Right, we could do that, yep. All right, no unfinished business. Under new business, Penfield representative to Monroe Number 1 BOCES Board, as presented at the February 4th, 2020 board meeting. The Monroe 1 BOCES Penfield representative's term will end on June 30th, 2020. PCSD resident Lisa Lattin met with Dr. Putnam to express her interest in serving on the BOCES board. Our board has been given Ms. Lattin's letter of interest along with her curriculum vitae. The nomination of a Penfield representative candidate to the BOCES board will be voted on at our March 10th, 2020 meeting. So you have that letter of interest right there and her CV. So if you haven't had a chance to look at it, you can look at it after the meeting. All right. Since we're all finished, how about if I mention first, next upcoming meetings, we have policy on Thursday at the district office at 12:30. And our next Board of Education meeting is right here at the high school on March 10th.
I had a question.
Yes.
For new business, is it okay to bring something up or not?
Yeah,
Okay.
yes.
So I spoke to Tom earlier about this coronavirus, and if you could, just for the public, say what, we have 10 students that came back from Italy, and what the process is for that.
Sure. Yeah, so just with the coronavirus, as everybody who reads the newspaper is aware, it's out there. And so our district works very closely. We're not alone with this. All districts in Monroe County work very closely with the Monroe County Department of Health. The Commissioner of Public Health for the county is a gentleman by the name of Dr. Mendoza. He's actually presented here at our high school for an event last year, I believe, last school year. Very easy to get a hold of. So we monitor the CDC and the New York State Department of Health regulations and requirements, especially around the quarantine protocols, it's called. And so just so you're aware, I'd like to share, because Calvin brought it up, that right now, the way it works through the CDC, and we have to follow those recommendations, is they're not, forcibly quarantining anybody. And if you are asymptomatic, if you don't have any symptoms, if you go to Strong, they're not going to test you for coronavirus. And if you are symptomatic and they test you, Strong doesn't run the test. They get sent out, and every test that gets sent out from Monroe County has to go through the County Department of Health, specifically Dr. Mendoza. So it's not like we can say, hey, I'd like to go and get tested just because I'm curious. We did have a school trip that went to Italy. A number of students returned from Italy. To be fair and honest, we've had students travel over February break all over the world. And I think every time you go to Wegmans, you're interacting with people who could very well gotten off and I don't want to pick on Wegmans or Tops. You're Disney. Disney is large. Yeah, any of those places.
Universal Studios.
Yeah, I don't want to point fingers, but Bill was at Universal Studios, so. No, but not to joke, the coronavirus is very serious, but we work very closely. So specifically, our students that returned, I reached out to Dr. Mendoza on Sunday to just see what the protocols are, and he got right back to me on a Sunday and talked through the fact that what I just shared with you about how you can test students. There's no forcible quarantine now. Anybody can do a voluntary quarantine if they want, but not if they're asymptomatic. And so right now, what all of our school nurses are aware of with coronavirus, they get an email at least once a day from the Department of Health, as do I, and they're just monitoring students who have traveled and just checking in and making sure. But if there's symptoms, then we reach out to the family and reach out to, obviously, Dr. Mendoza at the County Department of Health. If anybody in the community wants information, they can reach out to the County Department of Health as well. They're very open, and there's the phone numbers on the web in terms of reaching out to them if you're looking for additional information. But that's where we are right now with coronavirus. It's something that we're monitoring as we've done in the past with other such viruses. This one is new and different, and we take our lead as a school district from the local Monroe County Department of Health, as well as through them the State Department of Health and the most importantly, the CDC. down in Atlanta. So we don't have a whole lot of control as a school district on what we can do. I can't tell certain students or staff they're not allowed to come to school, but we work very closely with the Department of Health to make sure we're doing everything we can to keep our staff and students safe. And the number one thing, including with regular flu season, is please make sure you're washing your hands. We have signs up and reminders, but it's really important to wash your hands. And if I'd say to staff and to students, if you're not feeling well, you have a fever, you have symptoms of any illness, stay home. So that's where we are right now.
Thank you very much for that clarification.
Sure.
And I believe the CDC is the only one who can evaluate the tests, from what I've read.
Okay.
So it's going through them to the CDC.
Yes, there's one location where the tests are done in the U.S., so that's not like so that's a big piece, I think, which was if you go to your doctor, they can test you for the flu, and they will run the test right there. Even if you go to Strong, which is a nationally ranked hospital, they can't run the test. It goes to one location, and it does go through the Department of Health and then through the CDC. Good point.
Okay. Is there time for one more quick one?
Yeah.
Okay, it's really quick. So I talked to Tom a little bit, I think it was last week, about the books, and talked a little bit about, in terms of our social, emotional development, would it be possible to think more in terms of trying, not saying we don't do it now, but make it a priority that our English curriculum be as uplifting as possible, or work in that direction? And so I just wanted to share that. And you said bring it up in this venue, I think.
Yeah, I think we had talked about the textbooks. Your concern, please, if I'm wrong on your concern, I don't want to put words in your mouth, is that some of the books that came forward for review for the English class weren't very uplifting.
Correct.
And I think it's one piece I share, obviously, is that they go through a careful review. They're not the only books that are read. There's lots of uplifting books we do have, but when they go through. So where it comes from right now with our review process for books, there is not a requirement that our teachers have to only bring uplifting books to the board. I would say in looking at our read list, there is a very nice mix of texts that are both, uplifting and positive stories, and also some that are maybe dark. But even if I look at some of the books that are on that read list, they are also very real world. Refugee, as an example, as a middle school book, is a real story. It is uplifting, but it could also be dark because you're talking about refugees, but it's also real. So what I share with Calvin is the board gives me direction to then push down to my staff for reviews of text. So if the requirement is that books have to only be uplifting, then I would need to hear that from the whole board because it would change our process. I think it's fair from our conversation. So that's something we can look at as we move through the year, and I would look to the full board for guidance on that.
So just to clarify, I didn't mean they should only be uplifting.
Okay. But
it should be a thrust, and we should think about how we can incorporate that to improve our situation and the social, emotional, because it is a lever that we have at our disposal. That's all I was really saying.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep. All right. There being no further business, may I have a motion and a second that the meeting be adjourned at 7:58 p.m.
So moved. Second.
Any questions or comments? All those in favor? None opposed. Thank you.
Thank you.
2 minutes in my bank.
No.
An hour, 2 minutes. in the
Hour and
bank.
2
No.
minutes in my bank.
There is no.